Hey grandkids, Grandpop coming to you from Jacksonville Arboretum, a place that I've never been to before. It's got all these nature trails and it's supposed to be pretty cool. But I figured I would get at least one of these videos done before I went out there and tried to shoot in the wild. The place is starting to fill up, so I might not be able to find a place that's good enough. Today, I want to talk to you about heroes. And the title of this is, If Your Heroes Are Perfect, They're Not Human Beings. When a while ago, I did a video about, it was actually about two of my heroes, but it was called Ralph Walking Stick. And it was about this American Indian guy who I worked for a short time when I was a teenager. He really taught me some cool things. I suggest you go listen to that one if you haven't already. And the other was my dad. I did another video on my dad about his sense of humor, but my dad died 20 years ago, and he's still an influence in my life. I haven't seen Ralph Walking Stick in 50 years, more than 50 years, a little more than 50 years. And I still remember things that he said. He's still an influence on me. So these are the kind of people that I'm talking about, heroes, people that you look up to, people that you take after. I try to take after my dad, but I can't. But I try. And Ralph, to a certain extent, I try to take after. So if you want to have people that you want to take after, it seems to me that you should look to the Bible, because the people in the Bible, the heroes in the Bible, people like King David, the Apostle Paul, they've got to be perfect, right? So if you aspire to be just like them, then you'll work towards perfection. And none of us can be perfect, but you can work towards it. So we should look to the people of the Bible. And actually, you should do that, but you have to be really careful. Because let's take King David, for example. Both the prophet Samuel in the Old Testament and the Apostle Paul in the New Testament called David a man after God's heart. When David was chosen from among all his brothers to be the king, he was a little scrawny one. The rest of them had all kinds of curricula vitae, or whatever it's called. Curricula vitae, I guess, yeah. David was a little shepherd boy, and God said, I see his heart. But even though you have a heart for something, doesn't mean that you're always going to hit the mark. You may fall short. So let's take a look at some things that David did. He saw Bathsheba, this beautiful woman, on the rooftop of her house where she lived with her husband. She was taking a bath, which I guess was something that you did. She wasn't being some kind of an exhibitionist. She was taking a bath, and he was looking out. He should have been out with his troops because they were at war with the Philistines, but he wasn't. He was at home lollygagging, and he looked over there, and he went, oh, she's beautiful. And he sent one of his servants over to bring him over to him. She couldn't say no. She came over. He had sex with her, She couldn't say no. And she got pregnant. When David discovered that she got pregnant, instead of going, okay, well, I'm going to own up to this, he figured, well, let's just blame it on Uriah the Hittite, who was her husband. And Uriah the Hittite was out at war. He was one of the generals in David's army. And he was out where he was supposed to be, while David wasn't. So David said, well, the only way that I can pin this on Uriah so that this child's just raised as Uriah's son is for Uriah to come home and sleep with his wife. So he called Uriah back from the fight, and he said, go home. The next morning, he found out that Uriah didn't go home, that Uriah stayed on the doorstep of the palace. And the reason that he did that was because he wanted to not let David down. He wanted to be there for David. He didn't want to go home. And he still refused to go home when David confronted him. So David had him killed. And this is the way that he did it. He called in the top general, and he said, put Uriah the Hittite up by the wall of the city that they were sieging, besieging maybe. And, put him in this one particular position, and he knew that he would be killed. And that happened. So then David said, okay, now I'm going to make, because she's a widow, I'm going to make Bathsheba my wife. And she becomes essentially the queen. She becomes the number one wife. He had a bunch of wives. And she becomes the top one. She's the mother of King Solomon. Now, he did repent of this. He was confronted by a guy, I think named Nathan, a prophet, who told him a story and said, there's this guy that has a lot of sheep, but he takes the one sheep of a poor man and he kills and eats that sheep. What should be done to that man? And David says, bring him before me because we need to kill him. He should be killed for doing that. That's just wrong. And Nathan says, well, you know what, David, you're that man. You took the one sheep of a poor man when you have wives. You didn't need her. You saw her, you wanted her, and you knew you could get her. Don't try this at home. It won't work out well for you. Another time, God told him not to take a census of the troops in Israel. And he did it anyway. He repented and asked for forgiveness of that also. Another time, David had to escape his home. And he had his wife, a different wife, take a full-size pagan idol and put it underneath the covers so it looked like he was in there sleeping. And so he fooled these people that were looking for him. Well, that begs the question, what was he doing with a pagan idol in his home? Another thing he did is he multiplied wives to himself, which was against the scripture. So David was a man after God's heart. But look at how human he was. Homemade shake. Now, how about the Apostle Peter? Well, I have 9 things that he did. I had 4 for David. So there's 9 things for Peter. So there's these parents that are bringing their kids to Jesus for him to bless them. And Peter and the other disciples try to keep them away because I guess they figure that these kids are bothering Jesus, and Jesus rebukes them. You know, let the children come to me. Another time, Peter looks out of the boat and sees Jesus walking on water coming towards him. And he goes, I want to do that too, Lord, I want to do that too. And Jesus says, get out of the boat. And Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus, but then he freaks and he sinks and has to start swimming back to the boat. Another time, Peter gets into an argument with some of the other apostles about which is the greatest apostle. And Jesus has to tell him, look, we're servants. I'm a servant of you, and you need to be a servant of the people who belong to me. Another time, they're on this mountain, and nobody knows exactly where the mountain is, which mountain it is. In physical reality, they call it the Mount of Transfiguration. So while they're up there on this mountain, it's Peter and I think John and James are with Jesus. All of a sudden, Moses and Elijah appear. And actually, it's just John. But Moses and Elijah appear. And Peter goes, it's great that we're here, me and John. It's great that we're here because we can build 3 sukkahs. And sukkahs are these little shelters that look back to the days that the Jews wandered in the desert for 40 years. They get put up at this holiday called Sukkot. I think it's usually in October. It's a harvest festival. They're really cool looking. They're made out of straw and wood, and you put them up every year and then take them down. They're almost like little sheds. And so he wasn't going, it's good that we're here because we're so cool. He was saying, it's good that we're here so we can build these sukkahs. Like, you don't need to build your own sukkahs. But God winds up saying, this is my son. You need to listen to him. Like out of the sky, like, shut up, Peter. Stop being stunad. And another time, Peter is telling Jesus when Jesus said that he's going to be crucified, and he was sent to earth to be crucified. Peter goes, no, that's not possible. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. He's calling Peter Satan because he's saying, like, what you're doing is from the devil. It's not from me. Another time, Jesus says he's going to wash the disciples' feet. Back then, people walked through the dust, and we're talking about mostly desert area. They wore sandals. I wear sandals all the time, but I walk on pavements usually. But if you walk and on dusty roads and things like that, your feet get dirty. So when you go someplace, the host of the house will usually have a servant wash your feet for you. Well, Jesus is a servant. He came to serve humankind. And Peter's like, well, you're not going to wash my feet. You're Jesus, and I'm only Peter. And he doesn't get it. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus goes to pray 3 times. And 3 times when he comes back, Peter and I think James and John have fallen asleep. Can't even stay awake. The night that Jesus is going to be betrayed and crucified, Peter can't even stay awake. Then he denies Jesus 3 times. What did Peter do after all this stuff, especially after he denied Jesus 3 times? And what Jesus said to him is before the cock crows, the chicken goes, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he does. He says to various people, like, no, I don't know him. No, I wasn't with him. No, really, dude, I never met the man. kind of things. And all of a sudden, the rooster goes, He's so blown away by it that he actually quits the apostolic team and has to be brought back on board, because he's so devastated by realizing how frail he is. And there's a time when Jesus is gone, and the Apostle Paul has taken over as the head honcho. He's traveling all over the place, and so there's people saying, well, you know, that Christianity is a sect of Judaism, so you have to get circumcised, you have to eat the right food, and Peter should know better than that, but he sticks with the old school guys, even though he's 100% wrong. You don't have to be circumcised to be a Christian. Your heart has to be circumcised. So my question is that Peter, in the Catholic tradition, and I'm not Catholic bashing, but in the Catholic tradition, Peter was the first pope, and the pope is infallible. Well, how did the Pope get to be infallible if Peter was the first one? Because he certainly was not infallible at all. And a lot of the popes have been horrible people and did things that had nothing to do with causing people to believe in Jesus and go to heaven. Well, how about political figures? Here's one. It's a hero of mine, Thomas Jefferson. I admire Thomas Jefferson so much that I named my second son after him. I named my first son after me, which probably should have done it the other way around, but that's traditional. You name your first son after you. And I named the second one Tom. His name is Thomas Jefferson Clark. I'm sure he's put up with some crap. Just like when I was a kid, I put up with Clark Kent, Clark Barr. There was another one. I can't remember it right now. Well, during his entire life, Thomas Jefferson was openly opposed to slavery. He called it moral depravity, and it is. And a hideous blot on America, on his society. And he also believed that slavery presented the greatest threat to the survival of the nation, that the nation, the new nation, the United States of America. And it was. But he owned a whole bunch of slaves, and he even had a baby with one. And just like King David called Bathsheba, and she couldn't say no, slept with her, he couldn't say no. I forget her name, Mary Hemings or something. Couldn't say no because she was property. You know, he could have beat her if she said no. And then she had a baby by him. And he was a strict constitutionalist. I mean, his hand is in everything, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. And as President of the United States, he made the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million. I know that, Olive, you live in an area that was acquired in the Louisiana Purchase. I don't think, Arlo, that you do. I'd have to look and see what it was, but it was this giant, it doubled the size of the country. They had to send expeditions out to just map it and see what we had. But we had this, was pennies on the acre that we bought it for. I forget how many millions of acres. And he did that even though there was a good possibility that the Constitution forbade him from doing that. But he did it anyway. Well, Abraham Lincoln, he's another one of my heroes. He freed the slaves. So Jefferson owned slaves. Lincoln was president when the Union, where I'm from. I now live in a state that wasn't in the Civil War, but Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the states that I was raised in, they both were Union states. The Union won the war. Slavery was overturned. Lincoln must be pretty perfect, and he did that. He saw that this was wrong, and he took steps and abolished it. Well, he was a capitalist, and I'm a libertarian, so I'm a big fan of capitalism. And he was a Christian. He was a deeply religious Christian, so I admire him for that. But during the Civil War, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus. And what that is it's bring the body. You know, he could just put people in jail because they disagreed with him. There was, you know, it wasn't about, oh, well, we're going to send this guy to trial because we think he has committed sedition. Lincoln just had people jailed. And also, even though he freed the slaves, he didn't believe that the black race and the white race were equal. He believed that the white race was superior. The black race had the right to be free, but he didn't think that blacks and whites should be able to marry. Now, a lot of this stuff, it's easier to look back and go, okay, these people were horrible because, you know, Jefferson owned slaves and had sex with one, and Lincoln, you know, didn't believe in the equality of the races. But for their time, they were way ahead of it. People think, oh, if I was back then, I would have been different than them. No. You would be different than them, but you'd be a lot different than you think you would be. You'd probably be right in the middle of it. You know, if you lived in the South and you were wealthy and you owned a cotton plantation, you would have slaves. You can't, it's a form of chronocentrism where you think that, oh yeah, well, I live in this era and we're superior and so I'm superior. If I went back in time, I'd be superior. Well, yeah, if there was a time machine and you went back in time, you'd be you now. But if you were born back then, you'd be you back then. Trust me, you wouldn't be the person that you think you would be. And these people, they're not perfect. But because of both of them, we have a much better place to live than we would have if neither of them were born and did the things that they did. So other people that I admire, Martin Luther King. I've never seen proof of it, but it's not like anybody in the family has ever sued anybody for saying that he ran around a little bit, you know. And he was a preacher. Lance Armstrong, another one of my heroes, he did blood doping. Was it right? No. Was everybody doing it? Yeah, kind of. Most were doing it. Who was perfect? Well, Jesus of Nazareth. The only man that was perfect, and he was man and God. So it's the God part of him that made him perfect. The man part of him made him experience life. We don't have his complete history. I don't know if he ever, cheated on a test or lied to his mom or anything like that. It must not matter because they don't talk about it in the Bible. You want to have those other heroes. You want to look up to people. You want to study them. Figure out why did they do the things that they did. And emulate them to a certain extent. But if you want to emulate somebody, emulate Jesus. You'll never be perfect like him. But you'll be better if you emulate him than if you emulate anybody else. And for the others, just be cautious. Like I said, study them. Try to figure out good points, bad points. Leave that chronocentric, like, oh, we're much better now. Leave that at the door when you study these folks. Study them in the context of history. Chew up the meat, spit out the bones, as I always say. I got that from Ed Lazuski. Emulate their good points and reject their bad points. Peace out.